What is truly Scandinavian?
Finns have been doing sauna for an estimated 10,000 years. They bathed in them, they gave birth in them, they've even prepared weddings and funerals in them. Nowadays, there's an estimated 3 million across the country.
All over Scandinavia, Norway, Denmark, and particularly here in Sweden, you find these magnificent standing stones left behind by the Vikings, covered in wobbly carvings and all these runes.
Back up on the railing gate, find a way to blast you away from all the roaring depths.
Absolutely nothing.
Bullshit!
Hello friends and subscribers, and today we're doing something different. Yes, in the previous update I said I was working on the 2019 year in review, but today we're pausing yet again to bring you this video. Some of you by now have seen a recent and controversial ad, but for those of you who haven't and are completely unaware of what I'm talking about, it's a pretty bad example of woke advertising. Arguably worse than the friggin' Gillette ad they shat out last year. But if you're not familiar with what woke advertising is, it's basically advertising trying to market themselves by appealing to social justice sentiments. I'm also not going to mention what this particular ad was marketing. I'm going to let you guess by what it was about for those of you who haven't seen it. But I will tell you it's from a Scandinavian company and pretty much downplaying the cultural accomplishments of the different Scandinavian peoples, arguing that it all came from somewhere else and nothing is truly Scandinavian. Now, before I get into the ad, I will say this. I am not Scandinavian, nor am I of Scandinavian descent. I'm a pan-Slavist Polish-American. I'm proud of what I am. However, I have always admired and respected the people and culture of the Scandinavian countries. In fact, in my first Crusader Kings 2 playthrough, I didn't play as a Polish, Serbian, Russian, or Croatian king. I played as a Norwegian king who reformed the Norse faith, but whatever. Not so much modern Scandinavia, as most of those countries, especially Sweden, are now social justice pits, but yeah. But there are several modern cultural exports from Scandinavia I enjoy, above all others. Now, actual Scandinavians like Arch Warhammer, who is a Norwegian, have responded to this ad. And if you want a Scandinavian's take on this ad, check out his video, link in the description. This video is giving my outsider's perspective and why I think this video is full of shit. Now, the ad, when I play it, is going to come off as a little distorted in my video, and that's because, but due to the backlash, the copyright holder has been flagging videos, and my friend Privilege Edgy Shitlord has had 2 of his shit posts involving the video flagged. His channel will be in the description, please subscribe to him. And because of that very real threat, I also encourage you all to follow me on BitChute if you haven't already. One last thing before getting into the video. We'll have to define Scandinavia, because what countries fall into it vary from person to person, but generally refers to Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and Finland. Sometimes Greenland is included, and other times it isn't, and Iceland and Finland are often excluded, being more broadly defined as the Nordic countries, while Scandinavian countries specifically refer to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. It also appears this strict definition is what the ad is using, so I'm going to try to stick to it, but in reality I can't help but refer to what I consider Scandinavian, which may not fall into this strict definition. Now let's take a look, shall we?
What is truly Scandinavian?
That's a question that's open to interpretation. Normally I'd answer with what I think is truly Scandinavian, but this is clearly a rhetorical question.
Absolutely nothing.
Nada.
Niente.
There is no such thing.
Oh, really?
Nothing, you say? Let's see what led you to that conclusion.
Everything is copied.
Well, it is true much of what already exists in the world are mere improvements upon existing technology, existing ideas, and existing concepts. It's also true that when you look into history, you'll see nearby cultures, upon interacting with each other, often adopt ideas from each other. Let's look at the Turks, for example. They started off as Tendri, nomads, and horse lords from Central Asia in the first millennium. Now they live in Asia Minor, are religiously Muslim, and their language contains many Arabic and Farsi loanwords, and they use a Latin alphabet which was introduced to them by Ataturk in the 1920s. But is it fair to say the Turks just copied everything and nothing is truly Turkish? To say everything has been copied has got to be one of the most oversimplified ways to look at the world and how cultures evolve. I'm no sociologist, but it doesn't take one to figure that out. And how far do you want to take this point? Are we now going to say that the Germans who make some of the finest automobiles in the world should not celebrate this fact because automobiles were an American invention anyway? There's a thing called taking something else and making it your own by changing it enough. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Our
Vi
democracy?
människor som tillsammans formar framtiden.
Credit goes to Greece.
Oh, right off the bat, of all the things you can dismiss as merely a copy of a Greek concept, it's your democracy. We'll get back to this one, because what I use to reference my point will spoil what this commercial is trying to market. The ad then lists off pretty much everything that every modern country has, and cites which countries did what first, like parental leave and bicycling. They also bring up the wind turbines being Persian in origin, even though that would be an example of improving upon and modernizing an existing invention. No, the Scandinavians may not have invented the original turbine, but did they contribute to the modern development? The only thing I really have to say to this part is, and
Then it gets worse.
worse. What is this? An update on coronavirus?
Rumor has it the oh-so-Swedish meatballs might not be as Swedish as you think, but Turkish.
Notice they say rumor because I can't find a source that definitively states that Swedish meatballs are based off a Turkish recipe. I'm not ruling that out in its entirety, but I did find a source stating that Swedish cabbage rolls are based off Turkish cuisine, not the meatballs though. I know this doesn't help my point, I'm just pointing this out. And besides, it's, as Tim Pool in his video pointed out, also linked in the description, it's fucking meatballs. Every culture probably has their own form of rolling up meat in a patty and adding other delicacies. Alright, next.
Even the Danish isn't Danish.
It's Austria.
Also, Tim Pool pointed out in this video that while it is true Austrian bakers came to Denmark and initially brought with them their own recipe for the pastry we now call Danishes, the Danes eventually came up with their own recipes, making something completely new in the process. It's called taking something, an existing product or concept, and making it your own. For example, the Belgians invented one of my favorite assault rifles, the FN-FNC. The Swedish military has their own variant, the AK-5, making it even more distinct than their previous primary service rifle, the AK-4, which was an obvious G3 clone. To that effect, I consider the AK-5 the best modern Scandinavian rifle. My next example is arguably better, depending on your definition of Scandinavia. The Finns are good at doing the same thing, this time taking Russian small arms and making them their own. This is an RK-62 rifle. This is what the Finnish military uses. Despite being its own separate weapon, it is still considered a derivative of the Kalashnikov rifle. The same platform, if you will. Anyway, enough about that. Next.
And while we're at it,
America, thank you for taking the first steps
in empowering the women's rights movement.
Now, I'm patriotic. I would love to give America credit for something so progressive that other countries adopted in order to take the anti-American crowd down a few pegs, whether they be ignorant non-Americans or self-hating leftists here. But this will actually come to tie back into the previous point about the supposed Greekness of modern Scandinavian democracy.
We're no better
than our Viking ancestors.
What the fuck? Did I hear that right?
We're no better
than our Viking ancestors.
Ah, these fuckers knew what they were doing with this bit. I just can't tell if they were trying to make a profound woke statement with an obvious first-generation black immigrant saying he has Viking ancestors, or if this was a Donald Trump-style 4D chess move made to make people talk about the ad, meaning the we was Vikangz and shit. Either way, time to pick it apart. First of all, You don't have Viking ancestors, dude. Unless you're of mixed race and have a Danish, Norwegian, or Swedish parent, you do not have Viking ancestors. Your skin looks a little too dark to be of mixed race. Living in Sweden or Norway or whatever is not enough to claim that. Don't believe me? Imagine if an American company put out the same kind of ad, and they feature someone wholly of white European descent saying something like, "We're no better than our American Indian ancestors." Imagine the fucking outrage that would ensue. I've had ancestors living here since the US was even its own country, and I cannot say something to that effect. It's bad enough with Granny Warren claiming to be a Native American for most of her adult life, only for it to come out that she isn't and still taking flack for it. The same thing with the Australians. Can you imagine if a white Australian said something like, "We're no better than our Aboriginal ancestors"? Sorry if my Australian accent wasn't very good, but you get the point. It's a double standard. Hypocrisy. If this black guy can claim Viking ancestors by virtue of living in Sweden or wherever the fuck he lives, then by that same thought process, I can claim American Indian ancestors by virtue of living in the United States. But the thing is, I don't, because I don't have any American Indian ancestors. And this guy doesn't have any Viking ancestors. Apart from the utter ridiculousness of this part, let's take a look at what he's actually saying. That modern Scandinavians are no better than the Vikings of old. The left likes to talk about moral equivalences. When President Donald Trump rightfully called out both Antifa and the alt-right for causing violence in Charlottesville, the left threw a fucking hissy fit over for days, claiming there's no moral equivalence between neo-Nazis and those who oppose hate. Another bad faith and oversimplistic view of what happened there, but anyway, while I generally don't like to point at historical figures and historical groups of the far distant past and say they were bad under the principle that it's not fair to judge people from back then by modern standards. But the Vikings were known for pillaging, raiding, and raping all around the European continent during their time, and they would even go to other parts of the nearby world as well. Are you seriously going to morally equate adopting modern technology and ideas of governance from people going around in longboats, looting and raping other peoples through force of arms? I have never heard of something so asinine.
We take everything we like on our trips abroad, adjust it a little bit, and voila! It's a unique Scandinavian thing.
Yes, this is what we call taking an existing concept or piece of technology and making it your own. For example, J.R.R. Tolkien is credited with shaping modern fantasy fiction into the genre we see today, with it being replicated by other writers like George R.R. Martin and J.K. Rowling. However, he did not invent fantasy. Fantasy fiction goes back thousands of years. The earliest European fantasy fiction is arguably Beowulf, and then I guess you can consider the Epic of Gilgamesh the first fantasy story ever written. But what Tolkien did was taking an existing genre and reshaped it, making it his own in the process, and even taking inspiration from earlier fantasy works, and even Norse mythology. Hey, there's something that's uniquely Scandinavian. Norse mythology. Odin, Thor, Loki, Freya, Tyr. Or even look at my fucking name, the Black Lord of Fenrir. In the ancient world, the Norse gods and myths separated them from the other pagan peoples of Europe. You could argue, oh well, Norse mythologies branch off from Germanic mythology. And yes, while it's true the continental Germanics called Odin Wotan and they called Thor Donar. And when the northern Germanic tribes came to Scandinavia, they brought their religion and mythology with them and kind of just shaped it. It became Norse mythology. But the same can be said of the other ethnic groups of Europe. Besides the original Germanic tribes who no longer exist, who are you going to credit Norse mythology to if not the ancient Scandinavians? Modern Germans? Please. This time it's about continuity, not them adopting something completely alien. The tragedy being that if Christianity never came to Scandinavia, perhaps the Norwegians and Swedes and others would still be worshipping Odin, something truly Scandinavian. But I want to go back to taking an existing thing and making it your own. My favorite cultural export from Scandinavia is black metal, of course. The English band Venom is credited with inventing the genre in the early 80s as a part of the new wave of British heavy metal, But it was in the early 80s that black metal was pioneered by other bands, like Hellhammer or Celtic Frost from Switzerland, Sarcophago from Brazil, but also Merciful Fate from Denmark, and most importantly, Bathory from Sweden. And Bathory is credited with perfecting the genre to the standard we see today, with most attributing this perfection by the third album, Under the Sign of the Black Mark, while others like Razorfist argue Bathory's second album, The Return, is where it began, and some even arguing it all began on the first album. To me, it's pretty much irrelevant which album you could argue perfected black metal. The point is, it was Bathory who did it early on, and by the time the early 90s rolled in, holy shit, the original early Scandinavian black metal scene is pretty much 30 years old at this point. Oh, anyway, by the time the early 90s rolled in, Norway, Sweden, and Finland had their own bands trying out their own styles, with the Norwegian bands being the gold standard for what we know today, often known as true Norwegian black metal. You name a black metal band today, chances are they'll cite Burzum, Darkthrone, and of course, Bathory as an influence. Even more so than others like Venom or Celtic Frost. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to diss on those bands. I enjoy them too. I'm just putting this into perspective. And one more thing. Not only did Bathory perfect black metal, Bathory also invented Viking metal. No, not melodic death metal with Viking lyrics like Amon Amarth. I mean, the genre often described as black metal combined with Scandinavian folk music. So if black metal, despite its evolution, cannot be considered truly Scandinavian, Viking metal can. Unless you want to tell me Scandinavian folk music was brought over by the fucking Chinese or something. And as much as I could talk about black metal all day, I realize, despite arguing that you could still make something truly Scandinavian by improving upon something else that nobody else has ever tried to own, people will want an example of something made and invented exclusively in Scandinavia and not merely improved upon. We'll get to that next.
Every time we go beyond our borders, we add colors,
innovation,
Progress.
adding the best of everywhere to here.
You also leave something behind. I'll give out an example of something invented in Scandinavia, later adopted by non-Scandinavians. You're looking at a Krag Jorgensen rifle. My Krag Jorgensen rifle. It was invented by two Norwegians, Ole Krag and Erik Jorgensen. This rifle became the standard issue rifle of Denmark, Norway, and for a brief period of time, the United States. Mine's of course an American one, but it's the same platform. Anyway, it was trialed in 1892, beating out the other rifle designs like the different Mauser and Lee Enfield designs, and even several domestic American designs. The Krag became America's first smokeless, powder and bolt action rifle. Thank you, Norway.
In a way, Scandinavia was brought here. Piece by piece. By everyday people who found the best of our home away from home.
Okay, now it's implying the same mantra they try to imply for the United States, that multiculturalism is good and immigrants somehow made Scandinavia what it is. Even though most of the things they mention, thought of as Scandinavian as not being Scandinavian, were not made by immigrants either. Also, have you figured out what this is trying to market yet? It's not just some PSA about some far-left pro-third world immigration group.
We can't wait to see what wonderful things you'll bring home next.
And the commercial ends. By the way, this was a fucking airlines commercial for a Scandinavian airline system. You're supposed to market people to travel on your airlines to Scandinavia, and you're telling the native Scandinavians that essentially none of their accomplishments are truly theirs? I mean, what the fuck is this? Anyway, you're probably wondering about the parts that I said I'd come back to. The part about the supposed Greekness of Scandinavian democracy and women's rights originating in the United States. Well, I'm surprised Arch Warhammer didn't bring this up in his video, but I'll do it here. The true origin of Scandinavian democracy is, wait for it, Scandinavia! That's right. If the asshats who put this commercial together did their research on their own fucking history, the ancient Scandinavians had developed their own form of democracy. In one article, which I'll link in the description, one of the things that distinguishes Scandinavian democracy from Greek democracy was women were also allowed to participate. So, What's this about my country taking the first steps to empowering women? Nope. That was your country's. An interesting thing about the article entitled, How the Vikings Created Modern Democracy. It was put out by Fjord Tours. Now, who are Fjord Tours? Well, kind of like how the SAS are an airline service, Fjord Tours helps organize tours for tourists in Norway. And look how they market in contrast with Scandinavian airlines. Here Fjord are being patriotic and crediting Vikings as having a role in shaping modern democracy, introducing non-Scandinavians to a fact they might not have been aware of, saying that this is good, so come toward Norway. How does Scandinavian airline systems go about marketing?
What is truly Scandinavian? Absolutely nothing.
By denying that Scandinavians are making anything of their own or just merely copied other people's ideas and inventions. This really speaks volumes. Which do you think is going to resonate better with people? Because seriously, this video was massively downvoted and decried, so the Scandinavian airline systems pulled it from their YouTube channel, although apparently they just restored it to blocked comments. And when they took it down, they did this despite claiming they still stand behind the message. But if you go look onto their other videos, people have taken to voicing their disdain for the ad there as well. Of course, they're writing the backlash off as a cyber attack, and the legacy media is already coming to their defense because, remember, any internet backlash against social justice or wokeness must be the work of alt-right trolls, just like Gamergate and the negative audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes for The Last Jedi and Captain Marvel. One last thing I'd like to point out is that this ad kind of shows the paradox between two different schools of woke thought. One school decries what they call cultural appropriation, or more specifically when white people appropriate culture from non-whites, such as white people wearing dreadlocks or dressing up like American Indians. In short, it's bad when white people do these things because it's a form of cultural theft, which is why the We Was Vikangz and Shiet guy said,
We're no better
than our Viking ancestors.
Because in the age of hyperbole's extinction, a white girl dressing up like Pocahontas for Halloween is just as an egregious form of theft as a Viking robbing a monastery and bringing back exotic trinkets with him. But this ad seems to imply that cultural appropriation is a good thing, because the things we consider Scandinavian were in fact made by other cultures. Therefore, we need to go to more places and import more non-Scandinavians so they can enrich Scandinavian culture even further with their non-Scandinavian cultural practices or something. So, which is it? That's the paradox. White people, and not just white Americans, but even the indigenous white Scandinavians in Scandinavia, are uncultured and need to be enriched by the non-white and non-Scandinavian cultures. But in the same breath, it would be wrong for them to adopt non-white culture because cultural appropriation is theft. Anyway, that's all I have to say for this ad. It's bullshit, it has a couple of factual errors, and paints a negative picture of Scandinavia, claiming it's nothing without non-Scandinavian influences. I'm not a Scandinavian, and I know they're more cultured and have accomplished more than this atrocious ad is willing to admit. Like, comment, favorite, and subscribe to your heart's content. Be sure to follow me on BitChute, because again, this video will be there in the event the SAS pulls a Venefang X and tries to pull this video from YouTube. I am the Black Lord of Fenrir. Slava to the Scandinavian people. Slava to Scandinavian black metal. And Slava to the true cultural accomplishments of Scandinavia. Slava.